Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge, right after President's Day, and a $35 billion deal happening right now. You want to know more? Stay tuned to the Rebel's Edge. Hey, Pete, what did
All
you do
right.
over President's Day?
Well, here's the big question. We all know that Pete kind of moves around a little bit. Here I go to Florida. I've used my. Where are you?
Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay. I was going to say
Technically,
you could be in.
Pete, Montecito.
Oh, beautiful. Oh,
Yep.
I'll tell you what, that's a beautiful part. I remember when I got married out there in Napa, that was one of our first, probably our second stop as we were heading south to San Diego over the week of post getting married. And boy, I'll tell you what, this is as beautiful part of the country as you'll find.
And I had to split my ticket up, Pete, because I could only see Harry and Meghan on Thursday and Oprah on Friday. So, Oprah wanted to know how she could get the Rebel's Edge on her new network. So I had to, drive a hard bargain with her.
I love gold.
That would be gold. Gold, Jerry.
A lot of gold, Oprah. That's what it's going to take. And with Harry and Meghan, I told them, Pete and I would like to be recast on the remake of Suits.
I got to tell you, I don't know why that wouldn't come back and say, you know what, let's do another little shot here. Because that was a great show, John. I loved it. I haven't finished Billions because I don't want to finish it and then have nothing. So I'm only watching like one every so often now because I'm in the last, I think it's the last season right now.
Right. Well, Megan gave me a wink, Pete, when I said, so are we going to see Suits come back? And she goes, well, I don't know. Either that or she might have had something in her eye. I'm not sure which.
Were you guys having margaritas and you squeezed a lemon or something?
Well, as you guys know, we didn't trade yesterday because the markets were closed. And today we come right into a big $35 billion deal that we'll describe for you guys in just a sec. Mm-hmm. But as you know, we also start off with the macro minute every show. A lot of people waste a lot of time with the macro minute. We're not going to do that. In fact, they do the macro hour or the macro day. Yes. So the broad market's down 43 points for the S&P, Pete, and the NASDAQ's down 250. Oh, how thick do you think Jay Powell's socks are today? And it's like, oh.
There's a lot of wasted time.
Mm-hmm. Instead, we're going to talk about, hey, the market does look like it's kind of breaking down a little here, Pete. It's not that rates spiked. They spiked a while ago, but they're still sitting there at 420. So, Pete, I'm going to say that maybe they're handing off the baton to a different group of stocks.
And I think you're right, John, and I'll give you my definition of which ones. I think what you're seeing right now, and you look and you start at the beginning of February and you look at the XLK, that's the technology index. You take a look at that. Tell me how much you've seen that thing go up, because as of now, 20 days into February, it's basically flat as a pancake, but you start looking around and you try to find, all right, well, are people rotating or are they just selling? Looks like they're rotating to some degree. And obviously technology is such a big portion that that's going to pull the markets, but take a look at healthcare, take a look at energy. We've been talking about this for a while, and they're both starting to make a move towards the upside. You look at the price of oil, you look at the price of a lot of different things that are going on, all these mergers, all these acquisitions, everything going on with therapies and as pharmas as well as the biotech companies. We're seeing a lot of that, John. And with that, we're seeing a move to the upside there.
Yeah, pretty dang strong too, Pete. All right, let's talk about a fan favorite, fantastic futures.
Yeah.
Fantastic futures.
Well done.
Well, fantastic futures, folks. We are seeing some of those futures break down, and the NASDAQ breaking harder than the Dow stocks, Pete, and probably because there's not as much consumer discretionary and so forth, which will be one of our top stocks to talk about. But as Pete said, the rotation appears to be somewhat away from tech, even though we've got a really big tech stock reporting this week, Pete, NVIDIA.
Yeah. And that's going to be huge. We have another big week of earnings. I mean, shoot, it started off today. You got Walmart, you got Home Depot, all that kind of thing. But I would say this, John, are we on a path? And actually, it's an easy question to maybe answer is to 16 on the volatility index. We've talked about the volatility index this year. It spent a lot of time near the 12s. Then all of a sudden it made a move up, then pulled back again. It was back in the 12s. But now that we are into February a little bit deeper, we're starting to climb once again. And we're, last I looked, John, about 15 and a half on that VIX. I don't think it's too far fetched to say we could very easily be 16 this week. And we've been as high as 18 already this year, but that was for about that long. It was absolutely no time at all. But it seems like we're seeing a little bit more volatility, as we were talking about, with this transition maybe of sectors. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing the volatility index maybe hanging a little bit closer to 15, 16, and occasionally go up to 18 and pull back. I don't know how often we're going to see the 12s over the next couple of weeks, maybe months.
Yeah, well, and Pete, I was on the floor, as you know, shooting from the SIBO Global Markets on Thursday last week, our last show. And several of the people in that VIX pit were nice enough to come over and say, hey, we love the Rebel's Edge. We love what you guys are doing. Talk more about the VIX. And I said, Pete always talks about the VIX, because you do, Pete, for good reason. But they said that the 50-cent trader, Pete, has been coming in and buying upside VIX calls 50,000 at a crack.
Wow.
Over and over and over again. So there's a lot of smart money saying VIX goes higher in the short term, because that guy is always, it's a guy or gal. We don't know who 50 Cent is, folks, but whoever it is, they're buying a lot of upside VIX, which probably means the markets could be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Walmart, Pete, because Walmart, all they did was report a very strong quarter, and then they increased their dividend, and then they decided, you know what, we got whatever, $11 billion sloshing around. We're going to buy Vizio. And some people might not get, why would Walmart buy a TV? Well, number one, they're the biggest seller of Vizio in the world. Best Buy, I'm sure, sells them, Pete, but Walmart just cranks them out. And a lot of you don't know this, but there's if it's a smart TV, it's got an ISP, which means that from anywhere in the world, they can tell where you are, Pete. They can tell what you watch on that TV and so forth. Now, you might say, hey, that's an invasion of my privacy. If you use a smart TV, folks, they know what you watch. They know how long you watch. They know where you're connecting from. Unless you're very, very tech savvy and you know how to put a VPN between your Wi-Fi and your television. Most of us don't have that connection. It's just direct to Wi-Fi or direct to Cat 4 cable or Cat 5 cable or whatever it is. I think, Pete, that's one of the reasons, and Walmart might be sly like a fox.
I think you're right. You gave up the numbers, John. The only number you didn't cover that I will cover is the e-commerce number, which sales are up 23%. That's pretty outstanding. But everything else was pretty much perfect. And why is that? Well, I think the trade down was a lot stickier than a lot of folks think, John. I mean, when you think about this and you go back during the pandemic and we had all these people and everybody was talking about trade downs, trade down, trade down. Well, I think it did get pretty sticky. And that's exactly what I think is why we're seeing what's playing out right in front of us. That stock spiked today to 181. It eased back. We did have some unusual today as well. But what's really interesting, even with this great push to the upside, John, I was taking a look at it. The PE, the price to earnings, we use that as a measurement a lot, is around 24, which is not significantly high, because if you look over the last 8 years or so, their range is anywhere between 20 and call it 50. And they were up towards 50 PE twice during that whole pandemic and so forth in the last 5-8 years. So a lot going on. And yet the stock, even at these levels, still reasonable. So for that reason, John, I'm pretty interested still in Walmart. And the lots around here in Florida, I can tell you this, every one of them's packed. Every single one of them. You can't find a space. So there's a lot going on, and I think this is a company that actually still has upside, despite the fact that it has spiked to the upside in a big way today.
Yeah, and again, folks, think of it this way. You've got Amazon, and Amazon, I don't know what the percentage is, Pete, I'll look into it, but it's a minority of what Amazon sells is owned or at least stocked by Amazon. A majority of what Amazon is delivering to all of us, because I'm a Prime member. The majority of it is independent businessmen and women that are putting their products online through Amazon. Well, Walmart is not a shrinking violet here, Pete. They're coming on strong. They're doing more and more with Walmart.com. And I think that's part of the play here with Vizio. Clearly, to me, that is part of the play, is that they need to get in front of those same eyeballs and to hold on to them and maybe offer them things. Because, again, those TVs don't just let them know where you are and so forth, folks. In many cases, there are microphones there. And just like Siri, they know what you're saying. Yeah. All right, let's talk about Iovance, Pete, because this therapeutic company, they have a treatment for melanoma. We know that, of course, skin cancer, bad thing, especially in parts of the world where the sunlight is getting through too much, like Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. But there are many places where up there, the sun is really creating havoc with light-skinned people. And that is one of the reasons that this treatment is so needed and so valuable. Mm-hmm. So Iovance got a lot of press today from analysts that were saying, hey, this is a really great breakthrough that they have. And that's why the stock was just exploding to the upside.
Yeah, with this approval, that's pretty impressive. They're talking about this drug, John, or treatment, I should call it, I guess, is 1.5 billion is what they're projecting that this thing could do, and maybe more than that. So the combination of that and the deep pipeline that they've got, this is a company that they've got a pretty good cash burn. So this is coming at the right time. And that's a good reason why this stock has made the spike that it did. I think it was up, what, John, as much as maybe 40%. I can tell you this, the volumes today, about 7 million shares transaction normal for a full day, 34 million in the first 90 minutes. There's a lot of activity going on in this name for all the right reasons. They've given us something that everybody's pretty excited about. They understand a lot about that. And behind that, they've got a nice deep pipeline. A lot of that's in phase 1, phase 2. So it is going out into the future as far as time's concerned. But this is a very unique company. And I think they've got a lot more, John, that they could reach down to and potentially get this thing into a position for somebody might even be looking to buy them. And we've seen some consolidation in energy. We've seen it in the biotechs, as we talked about earlier, some of the pharma names. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of those names that people start going, I wonder if we should buy this before it's going to cost too much.
Yeah, well, it's a huge surge, and it is good news that they've got this treatment, like Pete said, not a cure, but a treatment for advanced melanoma and so forth. Good news. All right, Pete, how about good news for Discover? Discover Card, they made the announcement. That's, of course, credit card, folks. And Discover, I think it's a minority of us that actually have a Discover card. I don't know if I've ever had a DFS card, Pete, but Capital One is trying to really make a break and put their stake in the ground, Pete, I guess, to compete with the big players in this space. And for that reason, they said, you know what, Capital One's going to buy Discover. They're certainly going to try, and maybe indeed they will. I think this is a consolidation play that the other folks like MasterCard and Visa and American Express really couldn't do. I don't think they could, Pete, because I think their numbers are too big. But you're getting to smaller, not small, but smaller players getting together. Now all of a sudden they can compete more aggressively. And obviously Capital One has been getting more and more aggressive through the years. This could be a pretty big deal going forward.
Yeah, and makes them the largest credit card company, John, in terms of loan volume. So this is a really, really big deal. And Capital One, obviously, $35 billion, or actually shares that they're going to be able to do this in. This is a big number. And you wonder, John, did they consult at all with Warren Buffett? And maybe they did, because this guy in his top 20 holdings, Capital One is one of them. And oh, by the way, his timing, and he does stand by his word on certain things for sure, John. He talks about be greedy when others are fearful. He added to his position last year during that March, May, whirlwind of what was going on with the regional banks and all the concerns that everybody had. He ended up
Yeah.
scooping up another $1 billion worth of shares in Capital One. And that was when it was trading about $80. Well, it's trading about 130 or 135, something like that today, John. So I would say Uncle Warren is doing pretty well. And they probably did reach out and say, hey, what do you think of this? And I'm sure he gave him a big wink and said, sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, it's the fact, Pete, that they now have the largest numbers is a big deal on the loan side. Obviously, American Express doesn't do loans, really. You're paying off that card in almost, not every, but in almost every case, you're paying that off, every single month. But the other cards, Master and Visa, they do basically, let you pay over time. But if you're doing that, it can be up to 27%, I think, Pete, or something like that. So there's a big, strong impetus, even though, of course, when it is a loan, you have people that were default. And in fact, they track those rates pretty aggressively, folks, during these earnings calls. And, if the delayed payments are getting too big, then people start to worry. But right now, anyway, seems like even though I'm one of the people that thought the consumer would be tapped, Pete, by now, combination of Affirm and a lot of those buy now, pay later services have let people stretch even further, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, we've got one more for you, folks. Barclays, BCS. This is, of course, a UK-based bank, and Barclays came out with earnings, and the stock was up 7% right out of the gate, Pete. What did you see in this earnings that either excited you or you thought maybe that's a little overdone, that 7% pop?
Yeah, it might be a little bit overdone, John, but they made some moves that they had to make. And this is one of those banks that a lot of people were probably concerned about going back to 2000, 2008 world, and then even going back just last year, even when there was a lot of concerns about banking. And I realized they're a UK-based bank, but nonetheless, exposure everywhere. I think what I really liked was, and what everybody else probably was leaning on, was a lot of the strategic things that they were trying to do, some of the cuts that they were making, the reorganization that they are talking about. I think all of that, accumulated together. They also had the share buybacks. They changed the dividend as well. I mean, they did a lot of different things that I think for now, at least, everybody was pretty happy about. Now, can that last? Well, we'll see. They've had a past that's been a little bit sketchy for me, and I've not really liked this company very much, but it's interesting, up, like you said, 10, 12% today. That's a nice big jump, but I'm not going to chase this one, John. I think there's better places that I'd rather be in the finance world than in Barclays. Now, does that mean you shouldn't touch it? Not necessarily, but for me, I think there are better spots, and I think I've found some of those rather than Barclays. I think there's some other ones out there. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, I'll give you a couple of them, JP Morgan, some of these names, and including Citi, I prefer much more on the U.S. side than I do the UK right now. Every once in a while, however, I do look down at Brazil and some of those places, John, where there's some of the financials that are down there. They're kind of intriguing right now. So there are places outside of the U.S. that I look, but right now for me, Barclays, I'll let everybody else jump into this one right now.
I don't disagree. Well, what about Pete, getting into the Pete's Red Zone Sports? I know at the end of this month, we're basically right there into the combine and some other stuff. Like you say, NFL doesn't just mean not for long. It basically means 24/7. That's how they can have that network, I think, Pete. Because 24/7, there's something to talk about here.
100%. I mean, it never stops, whether it's mostly coaching and coaches, in the final couple of months of the season when there's a lot of changes and all the rest of it. Big one this year, a lot of different coaches being hired here and there and everywhere. I think that the fun thing is, John, we're 1 week today from the combine. And, we were talking about on the sports show that I do on Sundays, we were talking about this, and we were talking about how it's like a cattle call, right? I mean, there's no other way to really describe it. They're prodding, they're pulling, they've got the doctors doing this and that. Guys are out there running the 40 and they're bench pressing and, what kind of vertical, how big is your hand? Everything. I mean, nothing is left without being checked out by the NFL doctors and some of the coaches that are out there. So I thought it would be kind of fun to just say, all right, well, let's step back a little further. We know who the superstars are of college, right?
Mhm.
We know that the world right now is they're absolutely in love with Caleb Williams from USC. Now, I happen to disagree, but that's okay. I think there are other quarterbacks out there that I actually prefer over him. But everybody's going to have an opinion. Everybody thinks what they think. I just thought it would be fun, John, to pull out a couple of players that nobody's talking about. Nobody really knows outside of there. And you and I could maybe just define it for people. So they just had the Senior Bowl. At the Senior Bowl is another opportunity. It's almost like the combine without being the combine. They see players up close playing against one another. I think it's a much more realistic look. And if you're invited to the Senior Bowl, it's why you go, so you can show off who you are, what you are. So Ladd McConkey, that's the first guy I wanted to focus on. He's a Georgia wide receiver, John. His numbers do not scare anybody. And when you look at him at the combine, probably won't really stand out. I don't think anybody's going to just even turn their heads much and just say, hey, this guy's unreal. Except for when the quarterbacks are maybe out there throwing the ball, which is what football is all about anyway, throwing the ball to a guy like him. He's 6 foot, 185 pounds. He's not very big. He gets compared to Cooper Kupp all the time. John, the guy at the Senior Bowl, there was not one corner, including all these number one, first round draft pick corner. Nobody could stop the kid. He has the best movement as a receiver that you've ever seen, shake and bake and all that. So he might not fry you with his 40 time, but he's going to burn you with what he's able to do physically out on the field. And he's going to be special. I had one other guy, and then I'll let you jump onto it because you might I know this guy you like, Darius Robinson from Missouri.
Yep.
And you and I talked about him a while back. You had brought up his name, and I'd watched him play because a lot of people forget this still, but Missouri's in the SEC. He's going up against some of the biggest and best there are, right? And this guy is not just a D tackle. He's not just an edge rusher. The guy can play every single position on the defensive line. He's 6'5", 296 pounds. He probably will run a damn good 40 time. But, John, how about this? This past year, he had 8.5 sacks. That's a big number for a big man. He had 14 tackles for loss. And like I said, he can play the 3 technique all the way to the 9. He can be on outside the tight end, or he can be right up on the center. The guy can do it from anywhere, and he's going to be a scary one. So I think those are 2 names that people are going to say, where'd this guy come from? Well, you heard it here with John and I. I think these 2 guys are going to be special players when it comes to the NFL this coming year.
I agree on both, Pete, McConkey and Darius. And when you look at what Missouri did to a good Big Ten team, Pete, they took them apart. And one of the reasons was that big guy right in the middle there. Because, again, there are edge rushers. Like you said, he can be an edge rusher. He can be a nose guard. The nose guard's probably not where they're going to keep him, but, a 200 or call it 300-pound edge rusher, they don't exist. Most of those guys are 265. And they start off at 280, and by the time the season's winding down, they're like probably closer to 250, 255, more or less like Bosa and things like that, Pete, because, these guys are muscle, and muscle is, heavier than fat, but they don't carry the weight that the big guy like this guy at 296 or 300 pounds can carry. That's why you could see Bosa, or you could see Micah Parsons, Pete, line up over the center just to scare them because it is scary because they're both so fast, Micah and Bosa. But you won't see Bosa there very often. He'll be at his spot outside the tackle and beat him with an edge rush. This guy can do that, and he can bang in the middle off the guards, off the center, in the gaps, whatever. So I think this guy, if he puts up an eye-popping time, Pete, and I don't know what his 40 time is, just like you might not, but if he puts up an eye-popping time, what would that be? Somewhere under 4.75. If he can do that, Pete, then this guy's going to all of a sudden move up into top 10 picks territory.
Yeah. Well, that's the exciting thing is, we kind of know the numbers of the guys that are going to probably be in the top 5, top 7, top whatever. But it's always great to see somebody deservingly, not just because they ran a good 40, but deservingly because of what they did on film and what they did at the combine just to shock everybody. That's always the fun guys to come out there and watch. And it's why the NFL, like you said, they get more. And I'm going to jump to this NBA. So we've got the NBA, John. It was a record low in viewership last year for the NBA All-Star game, right? This year wasn't much better, but it was a little bit better. And it was probably only become a couple of the gimmicks that they had going out there, right? You had Steph Curry. He was going out there and he was playing against Sabrina in the 3-point challenge and blah, blah, blah. And I think that did pull in some people to do that. But I think that the reality is, John, I think the NFL combine will have better numbers than the NBA, even some of the games, but specifically this All-Star game that needs to get changed. John, the over-under should have been 400, which is asinine, right? I mean, if you saw what the scores were, I don't know if you did or not, but it was just ridiculous. And it was very close to 400 in total. So they need to fix that. They need to fix a lot of things that are going on here. Adam Silver is completely tone deaf right now, John. One of the things that he said when they asked him about load management, what's going on and how he said, look, we're trying to look at ways to incentivize players to play. It's like, really? So the money's not enough, huh? Yeah. So I got one stat for you that you're going to love. LeBron James. Everybody, there's a lot of people who go, well, he's one of the tough guys. He really goes it out. You know how many seasons? He's played 20 seasons, so everybody can use those number of games. It's a lot of games, right? He's played 20 seasons. Do you know how many seasons he has played every single game? One. One. So go back and look at Michael Jordan. Go back and look at Kobe Bryant. Look at what Anthony Edwards is talking about all the time from the #1 Western Conference leaders, the Minnesota Timberwolves. Keep an eye on that guy, by the way, because Rudy Gobert, Big Cat, they have a team, John, that's really special. And another nice little bit older point guard who's doing a great job that they just re-signed. But Richard Jefferson, I recommend everybody go over and take a look at some of the videos of him, John. He's one of the guys who comes on those shows, the sports shows, ESPNs and everything else. He was a former player and everything, and boy, does he rip these guys a new rear end because he talks about everything that Michael Jordan talked about and other guys. People come to see these guys play, and when they don't, that's a huge disappointment. And the amount of money that a family has to – he talked about himself, John. His family couldn't afford for them to go to the game. He went to one NBA game as a kid, one. And his dad bought the ticket, and his dad went across the street, watched the game, ate at a bar across the street, and then when the game was over, he picked up the kid, right? I mean, that guy ends up playing in the NBA. Why did he end up playing in the NBA? Because the people who were there at the time were all showing up to play in games. He didn't have to worry about some guy doing load management. But the NBA still has a lot of problems. There's a reason why these ratings are as pathetic as they are. And so I guess what I'd ask you is, what do you think that they should do? Should they figure out a way? And I don't even know how you do it. Do you fine a player? I'll give you an incentive. How about if you don't play and it's not actual, injury, maybe they don't get their salary. Maybe they missed that game check, right? I mean, that might be an influence to incentivize them not to do this and maybe play. What do you think?
Yeah, well, there's a classic Pete from Mad Men where John Hamm, one of the lead ad directors for the firm, is talking to this younger gal, and she's saying she's not appreciated and blah blah blah, and she says, you never say thank you, and he said, that's what the money's for. And with these players, I mean, you and I both know, Pete, that these players, we're talking in most cases, not a minority, most cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars per game. Mm-hmm. Well, that seems to be a pretty good incentive right there. So I would agree with you. I think that the NBA should sit down, Pete, and say, look, if it's not an injury and you don't play at least half the game, because I'd say half. You don't have to play the whole game. Right. If you're not on the court for at least half the game as a starter, as the announced starting group or something like that, Pete, then we're going to cut your salary by, or you're going to cut that game pay by 30%, 40%, 50%, whatever the number is. I think that would get them playing, Pete.
That might be an incentive.
Yeah, that might be. That's what the money's for. But I'd also say that the last time the NBA broke 10 million in views, Pete, was 2002 for their All-Star game. They haven't come near it since. They're not. This, fiasco that they've got going on right now is just an admission, basically, Pete, of what people have said all along about the NBA for the last 20 years. You only have to watch the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Don't have to watch the rest of the game. So the NBA is basically saying you don't have to watch the rest of the season. You just have to watch the playoffs, because now almost everybody makes the playoffs and so forth. So, in other words, they're degrading the value of their own franchise by doing that. And if the other teams did that, if the Major League Baseball or NFL or soccer or whatever did that, they would see their numbers declining like this too. But they don't do it. So the numbers aren't going down. Instead, they're going up. They're it's the number one draw on live television is sports, except for the NBA.
Yeah, and it starts from the top. It really does start from the top, and that goes and that floods down to the ownership as well as everybody else at each and every one of these different franchises. But they got to do something, John, because they seem to be very satisfied, and that's probably not a good thing. You'd rather have your guys be hungry than satisfied. So there needs to be some change if they want to start seeing some of these numbers go back up rather than continuing to slide down.
Exactly. Well, folks, we will not be load management on this show tomorrow. We will instead be giving you the whole Rebels Edge, and it will be John and Pete here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You know the drill. If you want to learn more about trading stock, options, or futures, go to marketrebellion.com/get started. That's the company that Pete and I founded, Pete, in 2017. So go check it out. That's marketrebellion.com/get started. And we will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks.